Montana, 1889. Deep beneath the ground, miners were chasing one of the most valuable metals in America. But according to a strange story associated with Montana's old copper mines, something else may have been found underground. An object. An object that seemed completely out of place. But there's a problem. The mine is real. The mining history is real. But what about the artifact? Before we talk about the strange object, we need to talk about the world that supposedly birthed it. Montana, late 19th century. This was a place defined by a single massive force, the mining boom. And at the absolute center of it all was Butte, Montana. Historical records show that Butte wasn't just another mining town. It was one of the most critical mineral-producing districts in the entire United States. By the year 1889, the copper mines of Butte alone were producing a staggering share of America's copper supply, contributing roughly 43% of the nation's total output, according to historical data from the Library of Congress. Day after day, thousands of men went down into the dark. They were chasing copper, silver, and gold through an endless labyrinth of underground shafts. Giant mining companies operated heavy machinery, while armies of miners blasted through rock, hauled out heavy ore carts, and built massive timber supports to keep the earth from collapsing above them. Surrounding these tunnels were booming, chaotic frontier towns, massive industrial smelters belching smoke into the sky, and an entire economic engine driving the American Industrial Revolution. This wasn't a myth. This was a heavily documented high-stakes industrial reality. The Historic American Building Survey and contemporary records from the era map out this vast underground empire in meticulous detail. We even have extraordinary visual proof of what it looked like down there. In 1889, the renowned photographer Carleton Watkins was specifically commissioned to document the Anaconda copper mine. His historic photographs, captured inside those very mines around 1890, show workers standing hundreds of feet beneath the surface, surrounded by raw, ancient rock and heavy wooden bracing. This was a real underground world, and it was deeply, profoundly real. But that raises an important question. To truly understand the environment where this story takes place, we have to go down. We have to leave the surface behind, pass through the heavy timbered mine entrance, and descend into the vertical shafts that cut deep into the earth. Operating a copper mine in the late 19th century was not a simple task. Every single foot of tunnel had to be earned through backbreaking labor. The miners weren't simply digging into empty, forgiving ground. They were cutting through ancient, unyielding geological formations, hunting for the valuable mineral veins trapped within the rock. Picture the reality of that daily descent. Men jammed into cramped cages or riding hanging ropes down damp, black vertical shafts. The air grew heavy, thick with dust and the smell of sulfur and damp earth. Once at the working face, the work began. Miners drilling rock by hand, swinging heavy hammers, and placing black powder or early explosives into narrow boreholes to shatter the stone. Around them, the infrastructure of survival was constant. Massive timber supports, big pine beams creaked under the immense weight of the mountain above, holding back tons of solid rock by mere inches. Small carbide or oil lamps flickered against the pitch darkness, casting long, dancing shadows across walls of raw, copper-bearing rock. Ore carts rumbled along narrow wooden tracks, clanking as workers hauled the heavy debris out toward the primary shafts. It was a brutal, relentless world of stone, sweat, and machinery. It was a world where men worked shoulder to shoulder with the raw bones of the earth, surrounded by millions of years of geological history. But listen closely to this distinction. We are not saying the artifact was discovered here, in this exact light, at this exact second. There is no primary record pinpointing the exact spot, but it is within this very real, very physical world of underground mining, this labyrinth of rock, timber, and darkness, that the mysterious story begins to take root. Now, we step past the documented history and cross the line into the territory of legend. This is where the story of the artifact truly begins, or at least, where the story claims it began. According to the oral traditions and old accounts passed down through generations of mining lore, something extraordinary happened deep within the labyrinth of the mine. The story tells of an unusual object, something completely foreign to the surrounding rock, reportedly encountered by miners during their daily excavation. But as soon as you try to grasp the details, the ground beneath your feet starts to shift. The story is frustratingly, maddeningly incomplete. Who exactly found it? Was it a veteran miner with decades of experience, or a green newcomer working the night shift? Which specific mine shaft did it come from? Was it deep down in the active stopes, or closer to the surface levels? At what exact depth was it unearthed? And perhaps most importantly, where did the object go afterward? There are no shipping manifests recording its transit. There are no museum inventory numbers from 1889 tracking its recovery. There is only the narrative, a tale whispered among workers, retold in local newspapers decades later, and eventually preserved as an internet mystery. When we examine claims like this, we have to be brutally honest about what we see. There are no original photographs of this discovery. There is no physical specimen sitting in a display case today for scientists to test. So how do we talk about an event that left no physical footprint behind? We treat it for what it is, a reported claim. A piece of folklore born from the dark, unpredictable depths of the industrial frontier. But regardless of its elusive origins, the core of the story remains gripping. Imagine the scene yourself. The deafening echo of picks and drills echoing down the damp corridor. A sudden fracture in the unyielding rock. A pocket of earth breaking open to reveal something that simply shouldn't be there. A miner stopping in his tracks, lifting his lamp higher and calling out to his crew. Other workers gathering around in the flickering darkness, staring down at an object that defies every rule of the geology they spent their lives breaking through. That is the image the story paints for us. But the question every investigator must ask is simple. Did that moment actually happen, or did the isolation and mystery of the underground world simply give birth to a legend that felt too good to ignore? This brings us to the first major reveal of our investigation. Or, more accurately, the moment we attempt to look closer at something that refuses to come into focus. What was the artifact supposed to be? When we examine the accounts and descriptions left behind by the lore, we run into a brick wall. Descriptions of the alleged object are frustratingly inconsistent, or simply unavailable. If you look for concrete specifications, you are left with silence. And in historical investigation, silence is a warning sign. To understand just how slippery this narrative is, we have to ask three fundamental questions that every single account fails to answer clearly. First, what was it made of? Was it forged from a heavy, anomalous metal unknown to the miners? Was it a strange kind of stone, carved with precision? Was it ceramic, composite, or something entirely outside the technological scope of the late 19th century? The stories drift from one material to another, never settling on a single truth. Second, what did it actually look like? Did it have geometric angles, intricate markings, mechanical fittings, or smooth organic curves? Without a surviving photograph, an official sketch, or a physical description from an eyewitness who left a sworn statement, we are left entirely in the dark. Every visual representation you can imagine today is purely a modern guess. Third, where exactly was it found? Was it embedded deep within a solid vein of copper ore? Was it tucked inside a natural cavity in the limestone? Was it found loose in the rubble of a blasted tunnel? Or was it discovered entirely outside the active shaft, simply reported near the mine? Location matters in archaeology. Without context, an object loses its story. Because we cannot answer these basic questions with verified data, we must handle the visual evidence with absolute transparency. On your screen right now, you are looking at a 360-degree computer-generated reconstruction of what the object might have looked like based on the descriptions. But notice the label in the corner of your screen. Reconstruction, not original photograph. This distinction is everything. We can model the legend, but we cannot replace lost history with CGI. The object remains a ghost in the archive, a shape defined entirely by the stories people chose to tell about it. This brings us to the most important scientific turning point of our entire investigation. It is the moment we have to confront a powerful assumption that fuels almost every O-part claim on the internet. The assumption goes like this. If an object is found encased inside ancient rock, then the object itself must be just as ancient as the rock around it. At first glance, it sounds logical. Millions of years of geological formation surround the object, locking it away in solid stone. How could something modern get inside a formation that took eons to build? But geology doesn't work quite the way internet legends want you to believe. Let's look closer at how the Earth actually behaves. Imagine a rock formation being laid down over millions of years. Deep underground, immense tectonic pressures build up. The rock fractures, shifting and cracking under the stress, creating tiny fissures, underground cavities, and shifting faults. Now picture what happens next. Over centuries or millennia, groundwater seeps through these hidden fractures. Minerals dissolve and reaccumulate, cementing everything together. But sometimes other things enter those cavities. A modern object, or an object from a much later period, can fall into an open fissure, slip down an active fault line, or become wedged into disturbed ground near an ancient formation. As mineral-rich waters flow through, they deposit layers of calcite, silica, or metal oxides around the object. Over a relatively short time frame, or through natural cementation processes, the object becomes tightly enclosed, trapped, and sealed inside a matrix of rock that looks ancient, solid, and undisturbed. To a miner breaking through that rock today, it looks like the object was born inside the stone. It looks like an impossibility frozen in time. But geologically speaking, it is entirely possible for a younger object to find its way into an older geological context. Here's the golden rule of archaeological science that changes how we view every single mysterious discovery. The age of the rock is not automatically the age of the object. This single scientific principle strips away the sensationalism. It doesn't mean the story is a lie, but it changes the entire framework of the mystery, replacing clickbait assumptions with rigorous scientific reality. When we strip away the sensationalism and look at the puzzle objectively, we are left standing at a crossroads. If an anomalous object was indeed encountered deep within an 1889 Montana copper mine, how do we account for it? How do we explain its presence without abandoning reason, but without ignoring the account entirely? To answer this, we have to evaluate three distinct possibilities, three theories that attempt to bridge the gap between documented industrial history and an unverified underground legend. Let's look at the first possibility. Theory 1. A modern mining object. Think carefully about the brutal, chaotic environment of a late 19th century industrial mine. Thousands of pounds of heavy equipment, tools, metal fastenings, machinery parts, personal items, and discarded hardware moved through those tunnels every single day. Miners lost tools in dark stopes, dropped items down vertical shafts, or left objects behind in abandoned pockets of rock. Over time, as timber rotted, walls shifted, and wet mineral sludge accumulated, an ordinary piece of modern mining equipment could easily become heavily encrusted, distorted, or wedged deep into unyielding rock face. To a tired miner working by the flickering light of a carbide lamp, a rusted gear, a broken bolt fragment, or a discarded tool part could easily look entirely alien, unrecognizable, strange, and completely out of place. But if it was just a modern mining tool, why did the story become a grand mystery? Because rumors grow in the dark. A mundane object, misinterpreted in the shadows of a deep underground tunnel, can easily morph through retellings into an anomalous discovery. Now let's turn to the second possibility. Theory 2. An earlier human object. Is it possible that the object predated the massive industrial copper boom of 1889? Long before commercial mining syndicates dug deep shafts into Butte, The region saw centuries of human activity. Indigenous peoples traversed the Montana mountains for generations. Early fur traders and prospectors combed the riverbeds, and early homesteaders or small-scale prospectors explored the surface geology long before deep corporate mining began. Could an earlier human artifact, a tool, a personal item, or a remnant from pre-industrial exploration, have slipped down into a natural fissure, a surface fault, or a shallow pocket of earth that was later intersected by deep underground mining? It is physically and historically possible. But here is the critical limitation. Without proper archaeological excavation, without stratigraphic notes recorded at the exact moment of discovery, and without the physical object available for laboratory analysis, this remains purely in the realm of speculation. We can imagine the scenario, but we cannot prove it. Finally, we must confront the third possibility. Theory 3. A true out-of-place artifact. This is the hypothesis that captures the imagination. This is the path that turns a local mining anecdote into a global internet phenomenon. What if the object was genuinely ancient? What if it belonged to a lost technological era, an unrecorded human civilization, or an anomaly that fundamentally defies our current understanding of history and geology? If an authentic, out-of-place artifact was truly recovered from solid 19th century rock, the implications would be staggering. It would force science to re-examine timelines, rethink geological assumptions, and ask massive, uncomfortable questions about human history on this continent. But right at the peak of that thought, we hit the hardest wall in historical investigation. We have to ask the ultimate question: where is the evidence? A fascinating theory requires extraordinary proof. And when we look back at the Montana copper mines of 1889, that proof is precisely what is missing. The theories stand before us, ranging from the mundane to the extraordinary. But until the evidence speaks for itself, the true nature of the object remains hidden in the dark. This is where our investigation shifts from theoretical possibilities into the raw, unforgiving territory of hard evidence. To separate the reality from the legend, we have to divide everything we know into three distinct categories: what is documented, what is merely reported, and what remains entirely unknown. Let's look at the first category: documented history. Here, the ground is solid. Historical records show that Montana's copper mining boom was real, massive, and thoroughly tracked. The Butte Mining District in 1889 was an industrial titan. Contemporary mining records, production sheets, and official archives confirm the intense daily extraction happening deep underground. For instance, records preserved by the Montana Historical Society from the 1889 to 1892 era provide exact assay reports, labor statistics, and production volumes. We know the corporate entities, we know the output, and we have stunning historical photographs from photographers like Carlton Watkins proving the exact depth and physical nature of those mines. Now let's move to the second category: reported claims. This is where the narrative lives. The story of an unusual object encountered by miners is passed down through oral accounts, local newspaper anecdotes, and decades of folklore retellings. These are things that people said happened, stories that captured imaginations and survived the test of time, yet lack the rigorous paper trail of corporate mining logs. Finally, we come to the third category: the unknown. And this is the largest category of all. Who was the exact miner who made the discovery? Which specific mine shaft out of hundreds in Butte did it come from? At what precise depth was it unearthed? Where is the physical object today? Are there any material composition analyses? Is there a single original photograph taken at the moment of unearthing? The answer to every single one of those crucial questions is absolute silence. When you line up the evidence side by side, this is where the mystery becomes much harder to solve. We have an undeniable, well-documented industrial world, but resting on top of it is an undocumented claim, floating on a sea of unknowns. And bridging that gap requires something history alone cannot provide. This brings us to the ultimate twist of our entire investigation: A moment that forces us to look past the physical stone, past the dark tunnels, and straight into the psychology of how humans create mysteries. For the last 20 minutes, we've explored the mines, weighed the geological odds, and analyzed the theories. But now, we have to ask a harder question. A question that most mystery shows are too afraid to touch. What if the real mystery isn't the object at all? What if the real mystery is the story itself? Let's trace how a legend is born in a place like Butte, Montana, during the late 19th century. It starts with a real mine, a claustrophobic, terrifying environment where men risk their lives every day surrounded by crushing darkness and ancient rock. In that kind of workplace, unusual things happen. A strange shape in the wall, a misidentified tool, a bizarre piece of mineral formation sparkling under a carbide lamp. In the heat of the moment, a tired miner shouts across the tunnel. A quick remark is made. Then, that remark turns into a story. The story gets told around the campfire, repeated in local taverns, and carried from one generation of mining families to the next. Decades later, a local newspaper picks up the anecdote to entertain its readers on a Sunday afternoon. Fast forward another 50 years, and that same newspaper clipping lands on the internet. Writers strip away the context, add sensational headlines, and transform a fleeting moment of underground confusion into an ancient, world-shattering opart artifact. Real mine. Unusual discovery. Story. Retelling. Sensational claim. Internet mystery. It is an entire ecosystem of folklore, built brick by brick out of the human need for wonder. But wait, before we close the book and dismiss the whole thing as a campfire fable, we have to maintain absolute historical fairness. Recognizing how a legend grows does not automatically prove that the artifact never existed. Think about that distinction carefully. Explaining how a story can be exaggerated does not mean the original event was impossible. It only means something much simpler and much more honest. The surviving evidence simply isn't strong enough to prove that it did. The legend is powerful, but history demands proof. And when the proof vanishes into the dark, all we are left with is the echo of a story that refuses to die. We return to the tunnel. The noise of the miners is gone. The heavy machinery has fallen silent. Only the whisper of cold underground wind remains. Rest softly on the raw stone, illuminated by a faint ghostly light. The CGI silhouette of the object sits quietly in the dark. Perhaps the object was real. Perhaps it was completely misunderstood. Perhaps it's nothing more than an ordinary piece of mining history, transformed by time into an extraordinary story. Or perhaps, somewhere deep within the forgotten archives of Montana, the answer is still waiting in the dark. Camera pushes deeper into the tunnel. History doesn't always disappear. Sometimes the evidence does.